Disenfranchised podcast. I am your host, Travis Gearhart. I am here with
Keith Cunningham
and Scott Tillman.
And we are
Disenfranchised.
So as we said, we're here with Scott Tillman, and he is from U.S. Term Limits. It is termlimits.com. So, Scott, tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Well, there's since the late 80s, early 90s, there's been a movement to term limit Congress. People get very fed up that they go there and there's a lot of shenanigans that go on, a lot of corruption, a lot of stuff happens, and they mask it. We're seeing even stuff in the last couple of weeks. But people are ready for term limits on Congress. The problem has been that we need Congress to do it. In the early 90s, there was a movement where a lot of states, I don't know, what state are you guys in? You're in Indiana?
Indiana.
So some states have what's called initiative and referendum. Indiana doesn't, sadly, but Michigan, where I'm at, Michigan does. And you can actually go out and gather signatures and put laws directly to the people to be voted on. And there's about 22 states that have that process in their state constitutions. And in the early 90s, most of those states passed term limits for their congressional delegation. The problem is they go to Washington and they lose touch with their constituency. We live in a republic, and we democratically elect our representatives to go and serve us there, but they have kind of stacked the deck. There's been a lot of different things that have happened over the years that make it so that they're not very representative of the people. And the idea is that term limits will bring them back closer to the people. The longer they're in Washington, the more detached they become, the more they start to represent special interest in Washington, D.C. interests and now international interests, rather than the interests of their constituents. And by making sure that we're always electing somebody, who's close to the constituents on a regular, predictable basis, we think we'd get much better representation.
Okay. Well, and I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the 90s, a lot of states, there was like 20 that passed term limits on their own congressional delegation. And then, if you guys remember, you guys might be a little bit younger, but the court from the 90s was different than the court today. And in a 5-4 decision, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, each state can't put their own term limits on their own congressional delegation. Instead, it would have to come as a constitutional amendment that would apply equally to everybody. And of course, the normal way that constitutional amendments get passed is by Congress. And Congress sure doesn't want to leave, so they're not going to go out and pass this. So they took a couple of votes to say, look, we voted on it and it went down, and then they tried to ignore the issue. Well, we don't want to let them ignore the issue, so we've been pressing it, and we've done some different things over the years, and now we've got a path that we can actually muscle them to do it.
Well, and the ironic part is that, sorry, I had a little bit of connection thing. I got it fixed. I'm using my phone as a hotspot, so I'm in a hotel. So sorry if the beginning part on my end was a little wonky. But the ironic part is that Congress doesn't want to do anything about it, but they don't want to do anything about anything. But they sure don't want to put in term limits they don't want to do anything, but they want to stay there forever not doing anything.
They love to push off any responsibility for anything. And I don't know about you guys, but I have a problem with, Congress delegating all their authority to the executive. I mean, they don't want to have to answer for anything. They would much rather pass laws here and there and let either the courts or the executive handle things. So they will push off things that, if you went out and polled people, there's a reasonable there's a reasonable middle on immigration, and there's a reasonable middle on abortion, and there's a reasonable middle on healthcare. But Congress doesn't want to do that. They want to instead go out and gin up their supporters that the other side is going to do these horrible, evil things, or that their side wants to do these things if you just give us power. But instead, they push things off onto the executive to make decisions, or onto the judiciary to decide if things are constitutional or not, rather than, taking up the reins and doing their fulfilling their responsibilities by passing laws that the people want. So they just love to skirt responsibility. They love to go on, junkets and trips and get all those donor dinners and all that donor money, and have their spouse or their kids work at the K Street lobbying firm or be on the boards of DC insider organizations, making 6 figures just sitting on a board with, no-show jobs and things like that, rather than do the work that we send them there to do.
Yeah. Good job if you can get it.
Yeah.
So Keith, you were just about to jump in on something.
I
was going to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
I was going to say, just by them pushing all the responsibility to the executive board or the judiciary, they don't have to take the blame for anything.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to get elected, and if you push it all on that, then it's either you're either doing it's always defense, right? So you got all right, so you got well, it's not our fault that the president's doing it, and you see that at the state level too. You see it where the state reps and the state senators, they don't really want to. Everybody kind of does the same thing. Everybody tries to push it uphill and tries to let it be like, well, we'd love to help you, but the governor, oh, am I right? That guy, geez. And it's crazy. So you live in Michigan. Ironically, I'm up in Michigan right now. So, what part of Michigan are you out of?
I'm in Grand Rapids.
I
Are
am
you in
sitting in a
town?
hotel room in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now.
All
Not
right.
even kidding.
We'll be around tomorrow. Maybe we'll grab some breakfast or something.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll give you a shout. That's funny. Yeah, I'll be here for 2 days. So yeah, I'll give you. I actually will. I'll give you a text. We can grab a beer.
Sounds
Or
great.
breakfast. You said breakfast, I said beer. It's the same thing. But so what got you involved in, like, what made you passionate about this topic? I mean, other than obviously caring about having good government, but what is it that got you to dive into this?
Well, I tell my friends when they ask why I'm political, I said I'm still mad about Ruby Ridge, but it goes a little bit deeper than
You're on the
that.
right podcast, friend.
I did peruse some of your back episodes to make sure, but yeah, I've always kind of bristled at government overreach, and I get frustrated at the spending, and I also get frustrated about the police powers and things, and I never really fit into the traditional conservative mold or the traditional progressive liberal mold. And I went to college, and then my family had a trucking business, so I jumped in the truck to drive truck, and I figured out in a couple of years that I didn't want to spend my life driving truck. And I was at a family reunion trip, and my uncle had just started working with a group called Americans for Limited Government, and he
Okay.
asked what I was doing, and we're just chit chatting over the course of a couple of days at a family reunion, and he said, "Well, we got a sister organization called U.S. Term Limits, and they're going to be working on this campaign in Arkansas and maybe another one in Montana, and they could really use somebody who could drive a truck because they got this big parade float with a giant wooden horse on it that they want to take around and do like these city meetings and town halls and type stuff." And I said, "That sounds like a riot." And so I went and did that for in 2004 for about 8 weeks leading up to the 2004 election, all around Arkansas. And they figured out I could do a little bit more than just drive a truck. And so I got involved with them, been kind of involved in the movement ever since. And I came back on full time. I bounced around between a couple of organizations and came on full time with U.S. Term Limits in 2016. And since then, we've really ramped up and been working at a really solid plan to force Congress to do the right thing on term limits. And that's what it is. You got to force them. I mean,
Yeah.
we can look back to, and a lot of people don't care for the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators, and there's issues with that. But there's a lot of corruption that led up to it. And the way we got that was because states started passing resolutions that say, either you do this or we're going to do it. We're going to go around you. So in the Constitution, there's two ways to amend it. Either the Congress can propose amendments, or when you get 2/3 of the states, they can take it to a convention and say, we're going to put these amendments
Yeah.
out.
Convention of
Congress,
States.
yeah. That's the one time that Congress doesn't want to shirk responsibilities. They don't want a bunch of state legislators who are going to be gunning for their jobs to come in and say, we're going to make retroactive term limits, and you guys are all out at the end of the cycle. They are never going to let that happen. So as we get closer, and we see this with other examples too, that when you get, the number of, they call them Article 5 resolutions, when you start to see those creep up, Congress will act. They don't want to they don't want the state legislatures to know that they could come in and, facilitate that change and really make those things happen. So they'll always jump ahead of it. So we think with this particular issue, because it's directly impacting Congress, it's probably going to need to get up to about 30, maybe 32 states before Congress says, whoa, 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 this is a great idea. Why didn't we ever think of this? And they jump in and take control of it. But we know they will. They'll never let a bunch of state legislators who all want to be congressmen come in and tell them what the terms will be.
Yeah. That's so with it, so me and Keith were kind of spitballing right before. We were talking a little bit about, like, well, what do you think is fair term limits and whatever, because even before, so to give the audience some background on how we met Mr. Tillman here. I had gotten a call from, I'm assuming, a staffer at U.S.
Yeah,
He was a
Perry.
very nice gentleman.
Yeah, he's in Indianapolis.
Okay. Yeah, he gave me a call. I was working out at the gym. I was on the exercise bike, and he's like, hey, hi, Mr. Gerhardt. I see you're running for, state rep, District 4, on the Libertarian ticket. Would you be interested in, I represent term limits. And he started giving me, I kind of interrupted him like, listen, this, you're preaching to the choir here. In fact, I'll do you one better. Who's your supervisor or your marketing guy? I want to have you guys on our podcast. Immediately, he was like, oh yeah, hey, he's like, we got a live one, and yeah, I actually sent his information over to a couple of other people, both Republicans and Democrats, and said, hey, that I knew were also in favor of term limits, and they reached out and went about that way. So it was, it was right up my alley, but it was one of those, it was funny because it's term limits was number one out of I've got 6 lists on my website of travisgearhart.com of all the things I'm running on, and that's number one. So but so we
It's a
were
great issue for people who are running for state legislature, because people want, when you go to the door and you're knocking doors, and I ran for state rep back in 2010, and we'll never do it again, but I did in 2010. And I know when you get to the door, people don't want to talk about water policy, and they might want to talk a little bit about roads if it's in the springtime and all the potholes are coming out, but they want to talk about federal issues. And
right.
you're like, well, I'm running for state legislature. What can I really talk to somebody at the door about a federal issue? And there's a way for state legislators to, work to get term limits on Congress. So this is a great issue. And we do mailers on it to
Yeah.
let people know where people are on the issue. And, people love it.
Yeah. Well, and even
When I ran for town council, I was getting asked about abortion.
that's
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
some
people want
funny.
to
wonderful
discuss
stories
the
about
issues they
that.
see on the news.
Yep.
Yeah. And you kind of get that. I mean, a lot of people don't understand even how local government works, I mean, there are things that I don't 100% understand, but I feel like half of it is being able to effectively say, hey, explain that to me, and unfortunately, a lot of people get into it and they're not willing to do that, right? They're not willing to say, hey, yeah, show me that. Show me how this works. I want to see. And usually they don't want to see how it works, because once you see how it works, you figure out, oh, this is a scam, or oh, this is a scam. Oh, this is a scam too. Oh my God, that's all just one big scam.
Or
Well,
now that you know how it works, you can't pass it on to somebody else and then not have to take the blame.
right.
Exactly. That too.
One thing we get asked a lot is, what actually happens when you get term limits? Well, and there's a couple of things that happen, and the one thing that I like to point to is that it breaks up legislator lobbyist relationships, because they're real cozy. They're
Right.
buddy buddy, and they're, oh, your wife's got a job at our firm, or your kid's got a job at our firm, or your uncle or your husband, or your best friend. A lot of that, and it breaks up those relationships. But we do have example from a lot of states that have passed term limits. So there's a bunch of states that also did term limits in their own state legislature. And one thing we
Yeah.
know, because there's a researcher, a professor who did a study, is when you have term limits, you get more educated electorate. And the reason is you have, every time that seat comes open, you've got a dozen people running for the open seat. And what do? They go out and knock doors, and they talk to people at the door about the issues. And those people get more engaged about the stuff that the state government actually can do. And it
Yeah.
turns out more voters. So you get more voter turnout, and you get more educated voters. So a lot of times people say, well, if the voters were just more educated, well, great. Term limits increases voter education, because people are
Yep.
out there talking about the issues and they learn more about it, and it makes them more engaged with their government.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I mean, you
yeah.
can ignore the government, but it's not going to ignore you. It's, somebody is
Right.
going to be there to do
Speaking of
it.
Ruby Ridge, so so what does so I signed the pledge, obviously put it on my site. I saw you guys had my picture up there like the next day. I was like, ooh, that's looking good, Travis, screenshot it, put it on my campaign website, all that fun stuff. So I not gonna lie, I didn't go through the fine print. So when it came to obviously I'm for, I like me and Keith were talking before that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not when it comes to something like that. I'm not let's worry about the size of the sausage casing, because he was like, well, what do you think are a fair number of term limits and blah blah blah, and I'm like, honestly, they could say 3 terms, 4 terms, 5, it'd be better than what we got. I'm like, I wasn't that worried, but we were talking about hypotheticals. So like what is kind of the proposed general idea of term
So
limits?
we also have a pledge that we give to people who are running for Congress, because eventually Congress will need to pass this to send it out to the states. And the
Right.
pledge that we give Congress is for 3 House terms, 6 years, and for 2 Senate terms, 12 years. And when we polled on this, and we've been polling on this for over 20 years, over 30 years now, we ask, what term limits do you think are right? And we get a certain number of the people say, one and done. When you go and talk to people at the door and you say, what's the right number of terms? A lot of people will, with a straight face, tell you one in office, one in prison. I mean, they're tired of them.
I
They want
like
them
that.
out. And then you
Is
get,
that polling in Illinois? No.
Illinois does have that term limit. They term limit you with an indictment and ship you off to one of the state pens.
Well, we live real close to the border, so there's truck stops that they sell shirts like right over the border that say we're the only state where our governors also make our license plates.
They at one time, I want to say, had 2 or 3 in prison at the same time. But it looked like Quinn got railroaded, and they ended up. There was a whole story behind that. So you guys maybe want to dig into that for another podcast sometime.
Well,
But
I think Quinn was on your page because we were scrolling through it, and I saw Ron DeSantis was on
not
the.
Quinn. Who am I thinking? Blagojevich. Quinn never went to prison. Quinn has actually been really good and has been a supporter of Trump. It's Blagojevich. He's the one who got accused of trying to sell Obama's Senate seat. And then
Yes. Didn't Quinn go to jail too, though?
he
No.
did, and Trump
Did he?
ended up pardoning him.
Yeah.
And it's a whole weird story. But when he went to trial, I don't know if you guys have ever done any another passion of mine is injustice in the justice system, in the way that the
Our
courts.
last podcast was exactly on that, so you're preaching the choir here, brother.
So when Blagojevich ended up in prison, he's at trial, and they would not let his defense team introduce a whole bunch of stuff that essentially exonerated him. He's telling jokes in the phone, and they're not letting them play the recordings that clearly show everybody laughing and joking, and instead they're reading it verbatim and not letting them actually, the jurors actually listen to it. And it's a totally different context if you're not listening to it. It sounds like then, yes, he is, but
Right.
joking about sleeping with Halle Berry to get the set, or to for the Senate seat, he's not being serious about it. But when they presented it, I mean, it's a crazy story. And you really gotta, get into that. So Illinois does have a history. And I think the most recent one that they're sending to prison, it wasn't a governor, but it's the speaker, Madigan. I think that he is,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if he's been sentenced yet or if he's still pending. I know he's on appeal, but he got convicted last year.
I don't know. I'm trying not. I've got enough other things going on in my general sphere that dealing with Illinois politics. It's bad enough we have to see it because we live so close to the Chicago border that we get. I mean, we're actually in Central Time Zone, right? So
We're 60 miles. 60
Yeah.
miles southeast, mostly south of
yeah,
Chicago.
yeah. So
Yeah,
we
I
get
lived in Wrigley for a
Chicago.
couple of years, and
Okay.
so I never wanted to stay in Chicago because after driving truck for a lot of years from Michigan to California, the Chicago traffic was the worst of the whole, the whole thing.
Right, dude. I spent 3 weeks in California in January, right? And again, I grew up in it was my first time I've been into California, and I grew up in the region, grew up Chicago, South Side-ish, Northwest Indiana, and I had always heard that, oh, man, L.A. traffic, it's yeah, Chicago traffic's bad, but L.A. traffic, and you
Chicago.
know what, man, I was in L.A. for 3 weeks, and yeah, it was in January. It wasn't peak beach season. So sure, I'll give it some, I'll steel man it a little, but I still, I will take LA traffic because at least you're moving. At least it was kind of a snail's pace, but at least in Los Angeles, I was moving. Me personally, I'll still take that all day long. But yeah,
I always thought it'd be a good campaign ad to just put up a billboard on the highway and say, if you vote for this guy, you're continuing this traffic, or something along those lines, just to really drill that message home to people. Because, man, you don't have to sit in that traffic for very long to, just be frustrated. I can imagine doing it. I've done it every day, and I moved away. I had no desire to continue that.
I don't blame you.
I think it's worse now because they haven't really added anything they haven't added lanes or added new roads. And now the trains can block the roads for forever. And
Oh,
once
man.
you block, say, Indianapolis Boulevard or US 41, you block that off, that all diverts onto the highway. Being a truck driver, I'm sure you know Klein Avenue, that's down to one lane now. It's just it's a nightmare up there.
Keith drives too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been
Keith's a team.
Teamster for 22 years.
So
I'm ready to be
I
done
always thought through
driving.
downtown Chicago, they really just need to stack it, so that you got, instead of the two sides where it goes down into there and 94 comes in, or not in 90 and goes out, and it should be double stacked, so all the lower traffic is going one way and all the upper traffic is going the other way.
you would
Well,
think.
it's been a problem for 30 some years. I mean, more than 30 years. I mean, I went to college in Minnesota, so I drive from Michigan to Minnesota. It was horrible at that time, and it has not gotten any better.
Nope.
No,
What
no,
I
and it's
always
not
say,
getting any better. They're expanding into Northwest Indiana so bad. It's
uh,
just, it's bad. It's not going to get any better for you. Sorry.
I've had to haul a lot of like scrap steel loads downtown Chicago on the Chicago River. There's no signage when it comes to bridge height or anything like that. And then you get there, you're like, oh shit, this one's 11 foot.
And when you've gone down in Chicago and you look at some of those old viaducts and stuff, it's like, what are they spending the money on? They're clearly not repairing the infrastructure that they have.
No.
Oh yeah.
That's one of
Well,
those
you
things about
remember.
government. I'm a limited government guy, but
Well, this
they know people will pay for the roads if they get bad enough. So they'll waste the money on everything else, all the frivolous stuff, because they always know they can come back, and when the rubber hits the road, the taxpayers are not going to be like, well, no, we're not going to go without roads. They can always get something approved for that.
yeah.
So me and Travis were talking earlier about Senate seats in U.S. Congress. What do you think if U.S. Congress was extended to 4-year terms instead of 2, and the Senate was dropped from 6 down to 4? So they both had. We were saying something about both of them having 4-year terms, and then staggering the elections.
Well, the elections for Senate are staggered. They're just on 6 years and they rotate. That's a little bit off topic for us, and sometimes there's issues that we don't get super vocal on. But in my opinion, in looking at how the founders set it up, I like that they're extremely short in the House, because I feel like they should be responsive and being up for election all the time. And that's, people complain because, well, they're always up for election. We got a couple of major issues, and this is me taking off my term limits hat, and I'm going to talk about a couple of other things that don't anybody
I
watching
get it. I get it.
opinion the U.S. term limits. But back in the progressive era, so Woodrow Wilson's era, they locked the size of the House to 435. It is a problem, because at that time you were talking about a couple of 100,000 people in a district, which is like a lot of state House and state Senate districts around the country. And what they did was they locked it, and then the population has grown, and they've never gone back in and done a readjustment. They did a little bit for a couple of years when they brought in Alaska and Hawaii, but then they went back to 435. And you know, I don't care who you are. You can't represent 700, 800,000 people. You just can't. And
Yeah.
I I live in, the suburbs, and I got, there's probably 10, 12 houses on my block, and I could walk down the street and we don't all agree on politics by any way, shape, or form. And the idea that you're going to get 700,000 people who are accurately represented by somebody is laughable. So, when we finally get term limits, the next issue I'm going to move on to is decreasing the size of districts. The movement out there is called Uncap the House. And if we matched what the founders had done, there'd be about 11,000 people in Congress. And when you look at what happens when you have a lot of people vote on something, the bigger the thing is, the harder it is to do this. They call it log rolling, but you get these omnibus bills where they put everything in to give everybody a little bit of everything. It's a problem. What you see is, especially in states that have the initiative, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, where people can actually do direct legislation by gathering signatures and put it on the ballot. If you do something complicated or that has lots of different things in it, people will vote it down at the ballot box. The same type of legislation passes left and right every legislative session in every legislature around the country. And in Congress, they're voting on a few omnibus bills a year. They lump everything together. And if we had more people there, it would be harder for them to get this big omnibus stuff passed, because you couldn't get enough people to agree on it. And you couldn't put enough sweeteners in there to get everybody in on it.
They'd have to
And
spread the
then,
pork.
yeah, so just having a term, but
Basically.
it's a tough, term limits is an easy argument to make. Kick the bums out. Everybody wants them out. Everybody's tired of, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and, Harry
Nancy
Reid, Nancy Pelosi,
Pelosi. Pick,
the people
pick
that are
one.
there for 40
Throw a
years.
dart at a pile of them.
Right. People understand that, and that's leadership. And, they're the ones who are in the power, and, they have the power. They control the committees. They control the assignments. But when you start talking about uncapping the House and you're sitting down, you can have a conversation with somebody as, do you know your congressman? I mean, they did a poll on this in 2020 or 2021 where they asked people, have you ever met your congressman? And the number of, it's not, do you have a relationship with them, but have you even ever met them? It was under 15% had ever even met their congressman. Maybe they met him 15 years ago in an event or something. So when you're talking to people about you need, a representative who actually represents you, people get that. But when the messaging goes out and you're getting to what you can put on a ballot and talk about, and you say, we want to have a lot more politicians in Washington, D.C., people go, oh, nobody wants a lot more politicians in Washington, D.C. They see that clearly as a problem. And it takes a lot more voter education to make people understand that. And it's tougher. I think that the
Yeah.
biggest thing that we could do, aside from term limits, which just force open seats and force it to be closer to the people, would be to uncap the House of Representatives so that people could actually connect with their representatives. And then ideally move away from geographic districts. And maybe there's a room between, we have a House and a Senate. Maybe we should have more senators. And if you want to keep it locked at the number of this, I appreciate how the founders set it up and that, the states should have representation, but maybe there needs to be 3 per state, or maybe there needs to be 6 per state or something like that. But then when it
Yeah.
comes to the House, we should divvy it up into a lot more seats. So, if we're talking 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 seats or whatever it would be, and they don't all have to go to Washington, D.C. One thing, get them out of Washington, D.C. All you're doing is making it easy for the lobbyists. You have one
Right,
central
right.
office in
Especially
Washington, D.C.
nowadays, we just had COVID that proved that you can do everything. I mean, where are we at? Well,
You
we
can do
happen to
everything
both
remote.
actually be in Grand Rapids, but that's by happenstance. So,
Right, right.
but
They
for the
can
most
they
part,
can do this
yeah,
stuff remote.
yeah,
And so if you did it that way, and then you say like Indiana's going to have 30 seats or 100 seats or 200 seats, and then instead of everybody coming in and voting for the person in their district, everybody goes in and votes for the person they like best. And yeah, you're going to have a 5-page ballot with 300 names on it or whatever it is, but now I can say I want to vote for this guy to go represent me. He knows, he's organized, he knows that he's going to represent me. Let's say there's a
yeah,
person who's famous, they're out there, they played for the sports team, or they, were, the local mayor who was really popular, and they get 10 times as many votes as everybody else. It does them no good, because that just means that somebody who gets less votes will get in there. And then you'll get people in third parties, libertarians, Green Party, Constitutional Party, the Progressive Party, all these parties will be able to get representation in. And when people didn't like what they were doing anymore, they just wouldn't go in and vote for them, and they wouldn't have a seat at the table anymore. And
yeah,
instead of having it, you live in West Michigan, so you're locked into this Grand Rapids district, or you're locked into this Northern Michigan district, or you're locked into this Gary district or this Indianapolis district. You could, connect with people around the state who do have the same views as you and want the same thing from their political representatives as you. And we could really change, the way the government operates.
Well, would it make so much more sense when it comes down to like interstate commerce as well, too, right? So like you're so worried about just making sure that, I was talking about this with who was it that was talking about how they would go to Michigan. Was that you, Keith? Where you're talking about how you go to
I,
Michigan and all of a sudden I don't remember. I was talking to somebody about it, about how like just how much more clearer the air is
that was
like in
me
Michigan.
earlier.
Yeah.
I said that
And I
people.
said, well, part of it is for us in our region is, you got all this shoreline in Michigan. And so, but you don't have to put every single piece of industry on your shoreline, right? There's a lot more there for beaches, for fishing, for whatever, pick something. In Northwest Indiana, 99% of our shoreline has some sort of mill or factory on it. But we also only have this much of the bottom of Lake Michigan that's attached to our state. And so that's what we were saying earlier. It was you, Keith. I couldn't remember if it was you or Aaron I was talking about. But that's part of it where it's almost like you just get out of the haze of Northwest Indiana. And it's not just the fact that you have cars that drive through every single day, because you have cars driving through here, but you have the businesses that are all just stacked on top of each other. You have the fact that it's all growing in there. And so if you're able to have your like the idea that you're talking about, it would make sense to me from a statewide level, because then you could talk, you could share, your state would almost act as its own sovereign, and you could make, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, but in my opinion, that should be the way that we should operate anyways. Each state almost acts like its own sovereign country, in
Right.
at least in terms of, take instead of the big U United States, the small U, big S United States of America, but that's just me. I think the federal government needs to be slashed, hacked, and let everybody keep their money. And if you want to stay in California and have all these benefits, but you're piss poor, then go for it. But don't take my money from Indiana and ship it out west, and vice versa, right?
Well, I know they've they kind of danced on the grave of Doge, and I thought it was a great opportunity, and I think they pointed out a tremendous amount of fraud and waste and other things, and now looking at what's going on in Minnesota and California with all the fraud and
Yeah.
waste. I mean, we have an economic engine here that is just huge. We can create all this revenue that they can siphon this much off the top of it and then waste that much of it. And everybody is still, I mean, we live in like the fattest country on earth, and I carry a lot of extra weight. And
Oh, same.
I
Don't
mean,
get me wrong. I was looking at my speech from earlier, and I told Aaron, I said, yeah, I do a lot of powerlifting, so the top part's pretty big too. But I'm like, I'm getting a little bit of a potato figure going here. I need to start running again.
but our economic engine is tremendous. And we came together for a national defense, obviously the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 to defend against, foreign adversaries. And the other thing that was a big deal that they did was essentially this is a free trade zone. You're not going to set up tariffs between your states, and you're not going to, stop interstate commerce. And I mean, that has been just a huge boon. And I mean, it should be a model for, how we want to work with other countries. Then, of course, we ran into, issues that led to the Civil War. And the response out of that was expected. And arguably has been the 14th Amendment has been, a huge reason why we have the rights that we have today that have been defended in the courts by, blocking what Congress would probably have otherwise allowed the states to get away with. And, I mean, the gun rights that we enjoy today and the rights of travel and the rights of free speech and things, not Congress, but the Supreme Court has actually stepped in and slapped down a lot of moves by Congress as well as the states to, infringe on those rights. So there were benefits that came out of that. I mean, it was understandable what led to the war, but our nation came out stronger. And since then, because of the 14th Amendment, has worked to essentially expand liberty to people who, even since the Civil War, have been oppressed, which is a great thing. And a model for what societies around the world, I think, should strive for.
Yeah. No, I think very well said. It is one of those things where, you look at, like in Northwest Indiana right here, we're having a lot of, there's a lot of different stuff going on with different businesses and whatnots. And I know that that's happening across the entire country. I mean, there's businesses. What we talked about on the podcast last week, Keith? I think there's up to nine different warehouses have been lit on fire, as almost like a protest against low wages and stuff like that. And it is, you do kind of look at some of the stuff like that, but like you said, even with us not, our level of poverty is very different than what poverty was 50 years ago, even,
Oh,
right?
and when you look worldwide, I mean, a lot of people like to rave about Canada, but when you look at, the average, income in Canada, and, the household income and what they bring down, and then you look at the lowest state on the U.S. states totem pole, Mississippi, it's higher than what they're getting in Canada. And,
Yeah.
the home prices and things up there, I mean, I heard British Columbia, they're paying like 700 to 900,000 for the average home sale. And it's crazy to me. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a weird situation.
Yep.
One thing, though, that's been a big issue for people I mean, the last few years has been fair elections.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people were up in arms about the Stop the Steal stuff. I'm not talking about the Stop the Steal or any of that. I'm just talking about straight up on their face fair elections. And you see different things being tried in different states. So California many years ago switched to what's essentially a jungle primary. Louisiana is a similar thing where they do top two. It's a jungle primary, and then the top two people proceed to the general. Um, Alaska and Maine have tried ranked choice voting. There's been a lot of different things out there, but there's a real dissatisfaction with the population, and this comes to where they just don't feel connected to their government, or like they actually, can make a difference. I mean,
Yeah.
we have over 90% reelection rate, and that, that 8 to 10% that, you know, gets, the new people in is essentially the same few seats
Yeah.
every term. I mean,
Well,
it's
it's a
a couple of
90%
swing states.
reelection rate, but the approval rate's like 30.
Yeah, if
You
that.
know, like make it make sense. I mean, right here in Indiana, you got the what's it called where they have the Keith, if you can help me with the term, when you can straight ticket voting. So in
Uh,
Indiana, you got straight ticket voting, and I'm running as a libertarian. I was involved in the Republican Party for probably 15 years, but we've gone over that 100 times on the show. So after several, that's why it's Disenfranchised podcast, because Keith was in the Republicans, I was in the Republicans, and after years of being involved in the big party, Keith's or one of the big two. Keith's an independent now. He likes to say he's an R for radical. And then I like to joke that I paid my $60 and went from a small L libertarian to a big L libertarian. So that's kind of where we're at now. It took us 40 years to get there, but this is where we're at. I don't feel like I've changed all that much in my views. I've maybe gotten a little more, maybe a little more liberal, which is
but
weird,
I
has
think
been weird
in
for.
Indiana, how you get put on the ballot needs to change. The Democrats and the Republicans, it's fairly easy to get put on the ballot. But you
Yeah.
as a libertarian, you have different steps to take. As an
Yeah.
independent, you have different steps to take. I do believe for an independent, you have to get it's either 1 or 2% of your district. You have to get signatures for them.
I want to say it's 2%, but because I was exploring the idea, but I know how this works, and you know how this works, Scott. I was concerned because I knew instead of 2%, I really needed at least 4 to 5, because they were going to find every reason to take names off that list that they could. And in fact, that happened in a case that we talked about on the show. I couldn't tell you what state it was now, but it was supposed to be like, I don't know, pick an arbitrary number, 5% of the numbers. And he walked in and they're like, sorry, we changed it to 8% last. And yeah, they just changed it. And so he walked in and he couldn't be on the ballot. But yeah,
Imagine,
there have been a
imagine
couple.
that though. Having to collect 5% or percentage really doesn't matter. Pick a percentage on a district that's got 700,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, just to be on the ballot. So so
Yeah.
so the Libertarian Party has made the number of votes necessary over the years. I forget what in the state of Indiana, at least libertarians I think have been on the ballot since I think 95 or something. They were just talking about it. Actually, we had a really good conversation. Justin Amash from your neck of the woods was the speaker, and he talked about back kind of what we were talking about with Congress, dragging it out of the weeds a little bit. And he was saying, he goes, a lot of people don't realize that you get this bill. It's physically impossible to read through the whole thing. And not just that, but then they make amendments. They don't tell you where they made the amendments, and they just put the bill and they say, hey, there have been some amendments. And you go, well, what was it? And they're like, oh, it's in there. And he's like, well, and they'll do it the same day, you know and he's like, well, then I can't vote for this. Like, I don't know what the changes were. What do we mean? And like we said, these giant pork laden omnibus bills. And I mean, when you say it out loud, it's just insane to me that anybody thinks that something major doesn't need to change.
Yeah, Justin Amash was great. He used to post on, post all of his votes. He would tweet them. And I really wish that would have taken off more than it did.
Yeah.
I remember he won in 2010, and then I want to say he was there until 2018. Yeah, because he was there after
Yes.
Trump got elected, because that's what he got crossways at Trump. And then, there's nothing like burn the good people down, which we've seen how that works out.
It's been crazy, man. It's been insane on a national level to watch the politics, and just been so insane to watch people. And you feel like you're in this bizarro world, because you're like, and you're talking to these people, and I'm not particularly religious. I'm just not. We've talked about this on the show. I don't know if you are, but on Easter morning to be like, hey, we're going to annihilate an entire people, praise Allah, and then post a picture of you clearly depicted as Jesus. Like, I mean, yeah, and we try not to get too in the weeds on the national stuff on this show, because what's our audience? We try to keep it more topics like this, like topics that we can actually affect, topics that we can. We had the libertarian governor candidate from Ohio on, Mike Saliba. He's a libertarian candidate out of Detroit. A couple of local Democrats. We got a couple local Republicans coming on. So we try to keep it within those realms. We don't talk a lot about Trump, because I mean, we could spend an hour and a half doing it. But yeah, it's just been kind of crazy though, watching so many people just at the same time be like, oh, what, you got TDS? I'm like, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah, I got a lot of friends who have, you know, not been not been excited about this foreign intervention situation. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I could go on and on about that, but we'll
Yeah.
there's 100 other shows talking
Yes,
about that. I'm
yes,
sure you guys want
yes.
to talk
We have
about this.
term limits. I definitely want to. I definitely before I head home. So I got a convention in the morning. So breakfast tomorrow wouldn't be good. If you want to do breakfast either the next day or beer tomorrow later on, I'll give you a text. I texted you earlier. So yeah, I definitely want to meet up and have you on again. In a different capacity. Not necessarily as that, because yeah, we do that too. That's fun. We're more than happy.
Have I got a minute to go on a riff about fair elections, guys?
You
Yeah.
you have more than a minute. You've got 5-10 minutes. Go right ahead. We do have a second guest coming on for we're pre-recording so he's coming on at 8:15. So we've got 15 minutes.
You know, a lot of these states around the country have done different things, like the ranked choice voting, and then there's ballot access laws, which is a whole issue unto itself, where the libertarians or the Greens have to go out and gather signatures to be on the ballot, where everybody else just automatically qualifies, and now all your money that you might use for a campaign, you got to spend it just to gather signatures, because one person can't go out and gather that many signatures, so you got to have people, paid and then
Yeah.
organized and verify the signatures and everything. But when you're talking about fair elections, there's really three things. And this isn't stop the steal stuff or anything like that. This is, are our elections, winnable? So there's a serious problem with incumbent advantage. And anybody who tells you different, they're probably an incumbent or buddy with an incumbent, and they're lying about it. But you have a significant advantage if you're an incumbent, because you can get on the local news, the local talk show. They want access to you. So if they have something that they're covering that they want your opinion on, they want to be able, keep channels open. So if you contact them and say, I'd like to come on your show and talk about XYZ, whatever you're working on in Congress, or I want to publish an op-ed, or I'd like to be on your blog or on your podcast, you give them access. Fundraising access. I mean, if you're hearing legislation, and I know that the legislation that I'm going to have an interest in, because either I'm a teacher, I'm part of the union, or I'm in the Chamber of Commerce, or I'm in, the trucking industry, or whatever else I might be. And I got to, you call me up and invite me to a $200 or $500 plate dinner, and I tell you no, how likely are you to pick up the phone when I call? So you have an advantage
Right.
there. At the same point, all my donations are going to be, out there for the public to see with the campaign finance rules. So if I donate to your opponent, you're going to know that I supported your opponent. You're not going to want to hear what I have to say. So you have two sides of that, where if somebody who's an incumbent asks you, you know that you want access to that person. You're not likely to tell them no. And if somebody who's challenging that incumbent asks you, you're less likely to donate to them, because you don't want to be seen as opposing the guy who's already proven that he can get the job, and you know that he's likely to stay in that job because of that incumbent advantage. And then you get the machines they build up and everything. So there's a huge incumbent advantage. And the only thing that you can really do about that is to say that every so many years, that we're going to make sure there's no incumbent here. You can't wait it and say the incumbents can't raise money. You can't wait it and say that we're going to give, public funding to this person here to overcome the incumbent advantage. They're just not going to do it. And when it comes to, and I mean, it wouldn't make for a better system. It'd just make for more problems. Another thing that we have is the issue of gerrymandering, where politicians are drawing districts at the state level to decide, how many seats the party is going to have. You fix the term limits problem, the incumbent advantage problem. It doesn't really, it might affect a little bit on the margins, with the gerrymandering, but it doesn't fix the problem. And states tried a lot of different things, independent redistricting commissions, letting judges decide the districts things, and they're still working out the best way. And if they fix the gerrymandering, it will help a little bit on the margins with the incumbent advantage, but it doesn't get to the core of the problem. And the third problem is money in elections. So a lot of people, the rallying cry that I hear is corporations aren't people. We got to overturn Citizens United. And that really is people not having a good understanding of that 2010 decision and what it was about. But the issue of money in politics directly relates to the size of the districts. If you really care about money in politics, if you're running for president and you got to reach, 100 million people, it's going to cost billions of dollars. If you're running for Congress and you got to reach 300 or 400,000 people to vote for you, and you got to reach them multiple times, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. And if you're running for a U.S. Senate seat, it's going to cost even more. Now, when you make those districts smaller, and you can look, they've got the data on this. It's all out there. And there's if you go Google uncap the House, you'll find this. It's very, they're organized, and there's a site out there. It's just got going in the last few years, though. But if you want to do something about money in politics, you've really got to make the districts smaller, because you can look, okay, if you're running for state legislature in New Hampshire, you represent about 3,500 people. And if you're running for LA County Commission, Los Angeles County, California, you represent millions of people. Okay. And one of those districts, somebody can come in New Hampshire with $1 million. You can be self-funding for $1 million in New Hampshire, and you can hit everybody with radio, hit everybody with TV, all the internet ads you can buy, put a weekly mailer, a daily mailer in their box. And another guy can go out and knock those doors 3 times in 3 months, because there's only 3,500 people in a district, and they've all met that person. And that guy can spend $100 at Vistaprint or at his local printer getting palm cards made, and go around and convince enough people to beat the $1 million spender. Meanwhile, you go to LA County, California, and those districts are bigger than a U.S. Congress seat. And you've got to have millions of dollars to even have a shot at competing. And I mean, if you're up against an incumbent, it's even worse. Now, so when it comes to money in politics, I mean, I don't want to throw out the First Amendment. So I'm not for letting the government, especially politicians, regulate speech. I mean, there's never been a piece of campaign finance legislation written that didn't benefit the incumbents. And that's because they're the ones writing it. I mean, every piece of campaign finance legislation ever written benefits the people who are there holding those seats already. They're writing the rules. They know that they can do them, and they write themselves ways around them if needed. But mostly they just, make it hard for new people to get into it. It's just like all the other rent seeking that we see with the government, where they set up barriers to competition for whatever field it is, whatever specialty, energy, healthcare, whatever. It's always about keeping out the competition and making sure that we have our hooks into everybody, and that our money has continued to come in. Same thing with campaign finance legislation. It's always to protect the incumbents. Now, if you fix the district size issue, that will help with the money in politics, but it doesn't do anything about incumbent advantage. That's still a real thing. And it doesn't do anything about gerrymandering. That's still a real thing. If you fix the gerrymandering, it doesn't address the money in politics.
We just had a knockdown in Indiana over gerrymandering. Luckily, it got knocked down, but but Trump and Governor Braun said they're going to put it back on this year's docket.
They're going to try again in 2027. Yeah. But these 3 issues, so you've got the gerrymandering, you've got the money in politics, and you've got the incumbent advantage, and they each have 3 unique solutions. Okay, the term limits for the money in politics, term limits for the incumbent advantage, district size for the money in politics, and some sort of a non-legislative redistricting commission for the gerrymandering. None of the solutions solve the other 2 problems. What solves one doesn't solve the other 2. It might work a little bit at the edges, but it doesn't solve it. And it's essentially a 3-legged stool. And until we get reforms on those 3 issues, our elections are not going to be fair. It's not. Somebody is going to be writing themselves, either the party's going to write themselves an advantage, the money's going to have an advantage, or the incumbent is going to have an advantage. And really, if we want to have fair elections in our country, we've got to address those 3 issues.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to stop. I can't think of anything else better to say after that. Scott, thank you so much for having or coming on. It's been great having you. We want to have you back again, and we want to dig into the weeds more on some of the other stuff. Cause yeah, like I said, I got your number. I'm right down the road from you, so I got the convention tomorrow. You know how those things go. There's a solid chance I get there. I walk around in an hour, and I go, all right, I got some time to kill. Hey, what are you
You guys
doing,
down at
man?
Amway?
It's at the Devo Center.
DeVos Center? Okay.
Yeah, Devos Devos. But I'm staying. Of course, I was late to the party, so I'm not staying anywhere near because the hotels right by the convention center were like $400 a night. It was stupid. So I'm
Well,
staying
I'll
in
text
a.
you and we'll figure out a time the next couple of days we can get together.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Well, thank you again so much, brother. I appreciate it. And yeah, so I'm Travis Gearhart.
I'm Keith Cunningham.
I'm Scott Tillman.
And we are
Disenfranchised.
Disenfranchised.
Well, thank you, guys.